Hey everybody, welcome to the Beauty and Pain podcast. My name is Matt Tardio, and this is my lovely lady, Brittany.
Hello.
On today's episode, we're going to be going over what happens after the initial act. A lot of times after, as a matter of fact, not a lot of times, about 70% of the time after a domestic violence incident occurs, the abuser ends up going back to the original, I hate to use the word, but victim, and ends up trying to get back in their life. And then another 40% of that, they end up reoffending again and getting back into it. And so that's something that you experienced as well, right?
Correct.
And which way did you experience that?
To kind of backtrack a little bit, I mean, I think there's sort of two different veins where this usually happens. It's either a reoccurring type issue with a long-term partner, like in a marriage, or there's a dating type incident like mine where there's a massive incident, right? And whenever there's a protective order put in place that's supposed to basically says, you can't contact them in any way, you can't be within a certain amount of space with between them, and a lot of times I think it has to do with just that ego of a narcissistic type personality where nobody's going to tell them what to do.
Well, it ends up 100% controlling their life while they're out, because 99% of the protective orders I've ever read and enforced, no contact through the person, even by third party.
Or their family.
So no third party contact. No possession of firearms, no alcohol or drugs. And those are the main top three that people end up getting busted on.
Yeah. But the problem is the reality in place when those orders are getting violated, nothing really happens. So in my case, I mean, it was pretty, in fact, the next day, there's probably 15 to 20 missed calls in my call log. I answered one, the first one, of him calling me from jail to come get him, which I found extremely bizarre. And so it was literally instant of him violating that protection order. And it never really stopped, and it became extremely overwhelming. So between that, and then between me getting, people finding me, old victims and old, scarred business associates finding me, it, right off the bat, it was extremely overwhelming, and it really messes with your head, and you don't really know what to think. And it, in my case, it became, for some reason, it wasn't even about what happened to me anymore. It was about what happened to these other girls. And then that's the bad part, because then they can manipulate you. Then that was never true, that never happened, even though that's so crazy because it happened to you.
I was literally there when it happened.
It happened to me, so why would these other people be lying? And I mean, I went so deep into looking into the old police reports and evidence, verifying that this is real, this really happened, but that should have never even been the point.
Right.
It should have been still what happened to me.
And the moment that he ends up violating it, you would expect, because you get this order in place from the court, and you're like, all right, I've got this order. Hey, he's in jail. He's actually in custody, and he called and violated the protective order.
And it wasn't even just him. I mean, I was getting emails, supposedly one from his mom, which was very bizarre, may or may not have been from his mom. I personally was in this weird space, and I'm assuming I'm not the only one, where I could completely block him, and I ended up getting to that point, and I'll get to that in a second, but in the beginning, he was sharing his location with me, and then texting me and calling me. And then my brother had come here to help me because of how big of a deal it was. And then was having communication with my brother. And I could have blocked him, but I was feeling all of this pressure to document all of these violations. So if I blocked him, then I couldn't do that, where he was violating the protection order. And I could see his location, which did give me comfort. And there was this total like...
But is it even really his location, or is it just...
It was, but it was still like a...
Right,
God,
but
I don't even have a better word to say to mind f- because he would take it off, then put it back on. Take it off, put it back on.
Right, and if you're a sick individual, you can actually turn it on and leave your phone in one place and go do something.
You could.
Yeah.
In this case, I think it was legitimate. I mean, there was one time where he was about to leave the state, and was telling me so, and then I could see on his location that he was about to do that, and he had an active warrant, and there's just so much that I learned throughout this process where it was like there was this active warrant, and I'm like, okay, why aren't you guys finding him? They're like, well, that's not how it works.
Nope.
We don't go track people down.
Nope.
And I'm like, then what is... I've just misunderstood the term warrant, I guess, this entire time.
Yeah, you would think that if somebody has an active warrant that people are actually...
For violent behavior, right?
Yeah, you would think that people are actually out there looking for him. That's not it. It's like, okay, well, if his license plates get... And it just recently changed.
If he gets pulled over.
Well, so, yeah, it used to be if you got pulled over and you're driving. Now that the law kind of changed due to a Supreme Court case. But basically, if you're behind a suspect's vehicle and you run the license plate, and it'll pop up off the license plate that they have a warrant. And then the driver has to match the description of the individual. So you got to think even at that, there's license plate readers that are propped up at stop signs and all sorts of stuff. There's stolen cars that go through there all the time. And they just pop up on alerts like, hey, stolen car drove through this intersection. But cops are so damn busy, they don't have the chance to even go deal with that.
Sure.
And there's
but
just
one thing I really
them.
did want to, like, so, because I want to get into some real life practical things. So if say somebody else is in a pretty similar situation where they have a protection order in place or a restraining order, and the goal is to get somebody that is dangerous behind bars, and maybe they're feeling the same type of pressure that I was feeling, where I want to block him, but on my phone, but I also want to make sure he's, has justice. Like, how do you, like, in your opinion, in your experience, like, what would be your suggestion, I guess?
Yeah. So first thing you got to do is get a cop to show up, right?
But whenever I called, the one time I called because it had gotten excessive, I was told, okay, I'll document it, but there's nothing unless he shows up. If he make sure to call us if he comes there. And I remember being very upset. I was like, if he comes here, it's too late. If he comes here, I'm like, somebody's not going to be alive anymore.
And that's crap because there's no contact written on the order.
That's correct.
Like no contact.
That's correct.
And it generally specifies phone, email, whatever. And that's just a cop being a lazy piece of shit. I don't know how to say that.
But it's the case, but I mean, and then that wasn't the only person that told me that.
Right.
So they basically just file it unless he shows up.
Because what ends up happening, now what I'll tell you what I used to do and what they should do, but what they're not doing. If that's the case and they take it and they just file a report, that's one thing. What they should do, I know one of the things we like to look for was making sure that you either sent a text or told them to stop doing it. Right. So, and the reason is because of the amount of people that go back and they don't want.
And they had already pulled all that metadata off my phone.
So you tell them stop, don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to you. Like stop calling me, stop texting me, stop doing all that crap. Number one, and then number two, what they should do is they should go and get the information from you. But there's two sides to every story, so then they should have to go confirm. So they should at least go pay. Did they say they were going to go pay him a visit, go knock on his door, go talk to him, anything like that? And that's messed up. Because at that point, if they have enough probable cause to arrest him, and I think almost every state, violating a protective order, especially for domestic violence, is a shall arrest offense. If you have probable cause, you need to arrest that individual. That's the way it goes.
Well, and they had all the cause, right? And so, and I don't know if this is correct, so please don't take this as truth, but based on my personal experience, when I did finally block him on my phone, on every platform that I was aware of, what happened was he was calling me through other apps that were untraceable numbers.
And that becomes a hard part because then you have to try to prove that.
So it was almost better to not do that.
Right.
Because at least I could say, like, you could see it, this was this person contacting me, versus it's way more difficult, honestly, for them to prove when it comes from somewhere else. And I think we'll share a clip of it, but at least in Texas, you're able to record conversations, correct?
Yeah, so you have one party and two party states. Texas is a one party state where you only need one person's consent that's on the line. So, seeing how both you guys are calling from Texas, you're willing to record it. He doesn't have to give consent to record it.
So if you're not in Texas, you should definitely figure out if you're a one party or two party state.
Facts.
In Texas, you are able to record conversations, and I even had a recording of a conversation where, I mean, this was a night that, and you remember this night, where he was calling every minute. Every minute for 45 minutes.
It was ridiculous, yeah.
I mean, it starts to rattle you. And I was like, I'm going to answer it, but I was going to make sure to record it. And there's some very disturbing parts in all my recordings, but this one in particular, he states his name. He was saying very threatening things and even goes to bribe me. And I turned all of that into the detective. And it still took so long. But at least I still had it. But it still is just, I mean, it's just like anything else. And I love, like, a lot of things that some of the younger generation does to protect themselves. Like, we all keep receipts, you know, and I was diligent about it. And I still have all of them because this was somebody that I felt like had power, and I didn't feel like I had power. And I was scared. To literally that night, I was like, I don't want to press charges. I don't want to press charges because I was scared.
And that's the messed up part is they're supposed to do it. Well,
but
let's talk about that phone.
Irrelevant.
Let's talk about that phone call.
Yeah.
Because if you're a witness and you're a victim, and then you're also willing to testify, you're now a witness, right? So victim and witness going in there, and there's laws against intimidating witnesses and bribing witnesses in trial, and that was turned into detectives, and nothing got done.
Yeah.
And it's on record, like it's
well,
being
and
recorded.
so the whole big problem is that the case where he had the felony probation was in a neighboring county, and the neighboring county had been calling the county that I'm in and trying to, like, warn them of all these things, and it totally got swept under the rug. But what I want to encourage everybody to do is to document, keep track. Journals are admissible in court. Obviously, all your phone metadata is admissible in court. They'll only pull, I mean, we're all adults. Like, I know that was something I was worried about whenever I had to go turn in my phone. Like, I mean, we all have, you know, who knows, like, from old text to old pictures or whatever, that, you know, you just don't want to have to go through and worry about that, you know. But that's not how that works. One thing he had threatened me with was getting me fired. And after it happened, you know, I was basically told my boss, like, I'm fortunate enough to be in a certain place in my career where I'm somewhat trusted, that I needed some days off, personal emergency. And after a few days, I realized, like, I needed to tell him what was going on because he had already threatened that. And if I wouldn't have done that, I would have been in so much trouble because he did. He submitted an anonymous tip through the website of all sorts of egregious things. And luckily I'd already had this conversation, and it was just God's timing in it, where they were able to, yeah, I'm glad you told us, because this is actually what happened last night. I mean, it was literally the same day, and it was the worst part of all of it. My job feeds my children, shelters my children, everything I've worked so hard for. And one thing my favorite part of my job is mentoring employees, and especially women. And if I haven't had the pleasure to have any direct reports that are also single mothers, but there's other single mothers that I do mentor. But the pressure is on a different level, especially, once you're at a certain point in your career. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I definitely wanted to hit on, is if you are in a situation like that, to be transparent with your boss in a professional, unemotional way as much as you possibly can. It's not a comfortable conversation, and it's not something that I suggest talking about to your boss normally, but in a case like this where it's like they could seek retaliation, it's important. And I feel that way right now doing this podcast, and as we sit here now, knowing I'm going to be testifying soon against his probation case, where they could be revoking his probation, what type of retaliation I'm going to get, because it's not just me that he's done this to. He's also tried to get another girl fired where the same thing happened, among creating fake profiles and messaging, high profile women and telling them that they were having an affair, and all sorts of things that I've heard from other people. But the job thing did happen to me, and it was so embarrassing.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, it's nuts. It's whack. Like the entire looking at it is freaking frustrating, from like me being on the other side of it and getting those calls and going over and dealing with that shit and getting it rectified to the best of my ability. Sometimes there is nothing you can do but document it, but what ends up happening, flip side, what a lot of people don't see is that information gets documented and it gets written down and a warrant gets written. But that's about all that really can be done. Nobody's gonna take a SWAT team and go like chase down somebody for violating a protection order, which is crap. There's
too many of them, and
there's way too many. You would
even as of a year ago, there's still a backlog in the court system because of COVID.
Right. And it is not hard to catch a felony. There is so many felony warrants like outstanding right now. It's freaking mind-numbing, particularly because of COVID and everything that happened. But even pre-COVID, there's a ton.
They all have limited resources, and I'm trying to be understanding about that. But I want to documenting things is a huge thing that people can do. It's an action item that they can do. I think another big thing that people can do is make sure you are communicating with your support system. Number one, it keeps you accountable, so you don't go back. I'll never forget, number one, when this happened to me, it's the first time I ever saw my dad cry in my entire life. And he literally sat here and told me, I don't know if I should say this on the internet, but
probably not,
that if I went back, that he would have to do something about it, and then he would go to jail.
Right.
And I know why he did that. It wasn't because maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but he needed me to know that, so I wouldn't go back. And so many women do. And it was helpful for me to hear that. So I think just talking to your support system is important. And then if you can't have somebody, my brother literally dropped everything and came and stayed with me. but eventually had to, do some things for his own life. And I was trying to get people to come here and to stay with me. But if there's somewhere where you can go to be safe, you need to do what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you cannot live in fear, and there's only so much the justice system can do. And I think we just want to make sure everybody's educated on that so that they can better plan.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's start from the beginning. Like, the fact that he called you from jail. Mm-hmm. So, inmates make calls all the time out of jail, and every single phone call that they make out of jail is recorded. And matter of fact, I can think of several guys that I kept in jail because they and they get told when they go in there's a mandatory protection order that's placed in the system. If you violate it, you don't get to leave. They get told. And so it's much easier when they're in custody. So if you do, or you had been in that situation, or you just had that situation, and you have somebody in jail that called you and you have a protection order against them, if you call the police, that's one thing. You can call the jail directly. Call the jail directly or call the police. Either one is going to fight over jurisdiction depending on where the jail sits at. So technically the police for the town you live could take the report, but then they'd have to take that and it would get caught up in the system. Or those police will tell you, and it's crappy when they do it, they'll tell you, no, you got to call the sheriff's department, you got to call the jail because they're the ones that have them right now. It's their problem. I say just cut it out of the way, call the jail, and tell them that one of the inmates that they currently have is violating a protection order. They'll pull the call log, they'll put a detective on it, they file the paperwork, same day, they already got him in custody, and he stays there, and then he's got to answer for the next one, and that prevents him from getting back out. And guess what? That's probably not going to stop them from doing it. What they'll end up doing is they'll end up...
It's not, and they'll lie about it, and if you're anything like me, it gets in your head.
Well, so what they end up doing is they end up giving the inmates like call IDs, like call logs, call IDs, whatever, that they end up having to dial in to dial out, like as they're doing it. And so that way they know who they're dialing.
Yeah.
And then what they'll do after they do the first one is they'll place your phone number on the like restricted list for them to be able to call out. Why they don't do it in the first place is beyond me.
It doesn't make any sense.
So what they do after that is they go to another inmate and they say, hey, let me get your number. Or let me get your PIN. And then they enter the other inmate's PIN. And there's how many inmates in the jail, right? So they're just able to go and repeat that process numerous times. But the thing is that they can also track it by the number, your number. So it's not just the inmate PIN. People are stupid. Criminals in jail are stupid. That's why they're in jail, because they got caught, right? So they just do the lookup from your phone number, like who dialed your number, and then they listen to the recording and go, oh, that was Dirthead.
And the funny thing is about my situation is he had broke my phone,
right,
and took it.
Right.
In fact, the cop brought it back to me in a glove.
That's something
covered in blood that was broken.
Right.
And the only way I answered is because I had it hooked up to my Alexa in the kitchen, my phone, and I was able to get that like plugged back in and working by this time, and it's the only reason why I was able to literally answer that call, and the only way I was able to get like in touch with who I got in touch with the next morning, my best friend, who was a total rock star when she came here, drove an hour without any questions, was through my laptop calling on through like Facebook Messenger. Right. And it's like you have to really be able to think outside the box, especially if maybe you don't know your neighbors, or hopefully you do, or if you don't have any other form of technology, you have to be able to figure it out.
Grab one. And probably the other, not all of them are the same. Where I was a cop, we had victim advocates that if we requested, they would come out, and they do have a lot of resources, and people tend to blow them off quite a bit. Because I guess maybe not blow them off, but you're in shock, and you've got a lot of other stuff going on.
I have a million things, yeah.
And then you have some random
I already took off work for a week just being out of my mind.
So those VAs end up having a lot of resources. So if your cell phone got broken in the altercation, they might be able to hook you up with that. If you need a hotel room to stay, just to get away, they are able to do things like that. Information out the wazoo, they can connect you to different charities and all sorts of different organizations, and people tend to blow those off.
What I was told is they can help you with certain things before
Right.
the court happens, but you have to fill out this whole application and mail it in. There's still a time delay as far as that goes through the state. Now there are a bunch of nonprofits
Mm-hmm.
that, especially if it's, you know, a reoccurring long-term type relationship where you feel stuck, you're not, there is resources, and I know Matt and I would figure out resources if anybody has this issue.
And that's why I'm saying they have
Yeah,
those
they
connections.
have those,
Like, don't just take the pamphlet and be like, thanks for stopping by. Be like, this thing got broke. Can you help me here? Who can
Yeah.
you connect? Like, throw those questions out and let them
Ask
answer
them,
them.
yeah.
Because if you don't know.
Nobody's going to advocate for you but you.
Right.
You have to be like, you have to find that strength within you, and you do have it. And that part is really true, especially if you're like me and also a mom, which is another kind of thing I wanted to touch on, because thank God my children weren't here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another thing is, I asked that night if I had to give them my statement, my written statement that night, because I was feeling very disoriented.
Mm-hmm.
It was a whole lot. They said, no, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I took my time and took it up there myself
Mm-hmm.
in a couple days,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very thorough.
Mm-hmm.
And when I gave it to the cop, his mind was blown. I was very ashamed and embarrassed because of I wrote it all verbatim, what was said to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an awful experience, and he was very apologetic. But one thing I do want to say too, because I also read the written statement from the girl before me, and it was I think 2 sentences, but she felt like she had to do it that night and give it to them that night.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't ask. And so one thing I do want to make sure people are aware is, you can ask, can I give it to you another time? I don't feel like I'm thinking as clearly as I need to.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I was able to do that. I don't know what the standard procedure is.
You can do that well, first of all, you don't have to say shit. And so
Sure.
like, they're happy. Like, you don't have to say anything. You don't
Sure.
have to write a statement out. You don't have to speak to them. If they have body cams, great. Like, it's fine to have it like on body cam, but they're still going to ask you to write one out, just a half, because it's like an old school thing, whatever. But they'll still ask you to write things out. But it's actually better to wait between 48 to 72 hours to fill that out.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad I did.
Yeah, no, you should wait between 48 to 72 hours. Now, there's some things that maybe they want down hard, right, in order to get the individual, depending on the circumstances, to get them in and keep them in jail, right?
Yeah,
like, you don't want
yeah.
to wait a week, but if it's, let's say it's like a felony assault and they've got to go before a judge before they can get released from jail.
Yeah, I mean, I answered all their questions. I, gave them all the information. But as far as my written statement, I wasn't prepared to do it that night.
Sure. So, like, yours, the way they wrote it up and charged them was for a misdemeanor assault, which is totally different than felony assault, which is totally different than family violence misdemeanor assault.
That's
Type
mine
thing.
was a family violence misdemeanor.
Right.
assault.
So, like, all three of those are different things in the way they go about handling it. One, you can scratch a ticket off to a person, and the other one, they've got to go to jail and go see a judge. The other, like, there's just all sorts of crap.
But I disagreed with even that. I mean, I know you have mentioned all the charges that they should have done, but I know just even based off of my research, things that were missed. And I did bring them up, and it didn't stick, but I still believe in advocating for yourself and doing your own research. No, I'm not a lawyer. No, I'm not a cop. No, I'm not a detective. That doesn't mean I can't read.
Yeah, damage to property.
Yeah.
Damage to property is one. As a matter of fact,
And ultimately, I've gotten nothing. Like, I mean, I'm out of pocket.
right, you should get restitution for half that stuff. As a matter of fact, you can get hit with domestic violence and damaging property. So if somebody takes, let's say, for whatever reason, so typically it has to do with fear, intimidation, coercion, control when it goes into that, like on that side of it. But if I go to punch a hole in the wall, let's say I get angry at you and I do any of those number of things, I go to punch a hole in the wall to do that, that technically falls under domestic violence.
Sure.
And I get charged for domestic violence along with the damages done to the property for whatever state law that would be.
But also, and this was another thing I learned, because right off the bat, I was getting offered gifts. A new phone. A new, here, like, let me give you this amount of money. Let me do this. Let me do that. Let me give he wanted to give my son these tickets. Like, there was all these things that he was trying to give me. Mm-hmm. And what I was told was if I accept any of it, which I wasn't going to regardless, but just for educational purposes, that if I ever did try to go civil, which I haven't, that it would all be gone if I accepted
I don't know about that.
Anything.
I don't know about that at all. Yeah, that's 110%. That's up for the judge to decide. Because, I mean, if you accept...
Well, I actually heard that from the DA.
If you accept a cup of coffee from somebody, but they burnt your house down, the cup of coffee doesn't...
Well, sure. But here's the reality. Especially if you're a female, especially if you're a mother, and somebody's sitting there dangling any type of, like, sizable sum, it is enticing.
Sure.
That's the reality.
Sure. And
it's hard to turn down. I don't want to go out of pocket to buy a whole new iPhone.
Right. Yeah.
My son's birthday party, he was trying to give us sweets to an NBA game. Mm-hmm. Like, these are things that can be hard to turn down. And I think recognizing that is important, but it is those types of things that can ruin your case if you're trying to move forward in a civil manner.
Sure.
And sometimes...
And in a criminal manner.
When the criminal gets shut down, the civil is all you have. Mm-hmm. Like, when you feel like there's been injustice on you. Mm-hmm. I understand why people go civil. I personally have not, but I get it. Mm-hmm. I totally get it. I still have a bill in my office right now from the emergency room. Mm-hmm. When I went, because I thought my ribs were broken.
Mm-hmm. The reason that they are taking those things from you, or like offering to do those things, like the phone, games, tickets, so on and so forth.
It was so excessive.
From an outside looking in, or from the inside looking out, you might be like, yeah, maybe they're just trying to buy me off. But it's not just trying to buy you off, it's trying to gain that little bit more of control and into your life.
Sometimes it's that, but in this case, it wasn't. In this case, it was very strategic. It was sent to me by a courier.
Right.
It was very strategic. Again, can't say this enough, this was not his first rodeo. Mm-hmm. He knew exactly what he was doing. But I think in other cases, and probably more common, would be more of the narcissistic side, where it's about control and the cycle of abuse, and love bombing, then abusing, then love bombing, then abusing. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I want to know, and what probably others want to know, beyond what I did and my experiences, is more the generalities of how you handle somebody violating a protection order. I said I did call and report, and it kind of fell on deaf ears, and it was frustrating, and I felt like I was on my own. Mm-hmm. But from your experience as a law enforcement officer, you know, what you saw, what worked, what do you suggest to everybody?
Yeah. Cops are just like anything else. Like you walk into a restaurant, sometimes you get good service, sometimes you get bad service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You don't know who's going to end up responding or taking your call, or even if they do bother showing up, sometimes they'll just call you. Did you get a phone call or did they show up?
For what?
When you called to complain about him violating the protection order and try to get a report on that, did they just
Nothing.
call you?
No.
Did they show up?
No.
It was the dispatcher?
Yeah. But I will say the one thing I did do that they did
So,
follow up on was I did call and ask extra patrol. I don't know the exact words
Yeah.
for it.
yeah,
Around my house, and that did happen.
sure. So, one, you want to get a cop to respond. Like dispatchers, they get a little bit of information and sometimes they try to screen calls and they shouldn't.
Well,
to
it was a
help cops out.
cop that I was talking to, I guess.
So the easiest way to go about it is when you call and you go to report it, you don't have to explain yourself over the phone. It is a service that you pay for through your taxes. They're there to serve you. Whether or not it takes 4 hours for them to respond, they might ask you if you're an immediate nature, right? But you want to get somebody on scene. Like you want to get somebody here at the house or wherever. So tell them, hey, I've got a protection order in place against this individual. They've been contacting me. I don't want to discuss the particulars over the phone. I'd be much more comfortable talking to an officer in person.
That's
And yes,
really good advice.
I am in fear.
I wish I
am
had
scared.
known that.
Right? Like it's very simple. Like I'm sorry, random person over the phone, dispatcher. I'm not discussing my life with you. I'd like an officer over at my house to go over this. Period. And here's the other thing too. Municipalities, right? So you live in a city and you call. Sheriff's departments also go over that city. So if you call the local police department ends up telling you to kiss off, call the sheriff's department. Not kidding you. Look up the non-emergency line for the sheriff's department and call them. And tell them the exact same thing. I have a protection order in place. It was violated. I have proof. It's documented and I'm in fear. The police department blew me off. You guys also have jurisdiction over this area. Will you come? The sheriff's department's not going to come, but what they're going to do is they're going to call the cops and be like, what the hell are you doing? And cops don't like being embarrassed, like for blowing stuff like that off.
Sure.
And it makes them look bad outside of their agency, having another one call and be like, what the hell are you people doing? So call the sheriff's department and do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from doing all that, let's say because sometimes we feel that something should be documented or we feel that a report should get filed on it, and sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes like all the evidence isn't there and they don't do it. You can still ask them to file an incident report. Big difference between them typing in CAD notes. Even if they refuse to file an incident report, they have that, still take down the incident number and have that documented because it's still a legal draft document that you called, you provided this evidence, and it forces that officer to write down why they chose not to take a report and file a warrant. And so it puts their ass on the line,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it puts them on the line. And you can still ask for a supervisor if you don't agree.
Yeah.
So you've got all those things. Now, that's just off one phone call. Those are your options off one. If you're getting multiple phone calls, right? If you're getting multiple phone calls, report that. What ends up happening is they break things down by incident. You would think that if he called me, 30 times in 45 minutes, if he called me 30 times in 45 minutes, that should be 30 violations of a single protection order. But what they do is they take all that and they say, this is one incident. This person definitely wasn't playing games. They called 30 times in 45 minutes. And this is a clear violation. And even if they don't do that, if they don't take that report, you can still get it documented. You can still pull that information. And you call back the next time and the next time and the next time.
What
because
about
you're
when
going to get
they-
a different dispatcher, you're going to get a different cop.
Yeah.
And then things will start getting done because they're going to see the call history also that goes into it.
Right.
That looks really bad on law enforcement as well. When you have call history to that number, the dispatcher sees the call history of you calling in, and there's stalking laws and things like that go into place. So it starts elevating, right? It starts to elevate the seriousness of the events. It's no longer just a one-off. It starts elevating the seriousness of the event. If something happens to you, now the city, right, Now your family can sue the city for them failing to do their job, and it makes them look bad. And so all these things they have to take into account. So just because you get blown off one time, don't take that as it is. Ask for at least an incident number, ask for an incident number, ask them to put it in the notes, and then pull that information from the department the next day.
So I was told to bring my phone in, and they were going to pull all this metadata off my phone, and it took forever. Not only did it take forever, but it took forever, and they have my phone.
Right.
So I can't answer work phone calls, all these things. But I was told when they do that, that every single act of contact was a violation of the protection order.
That's true and false, like I said. Because, and again, district attorneys, judges, case law, it's all different on how they go about stacking it and how they try things in there. Technically, is every single call a violation? Yeah, but they look at it as an incident. And so if it's, like a 20-minute time span with 10 phone calls, it'll go on one report. Like you can call that in on one report and be like, between this hour and this hour, he called 20 times, and they'll take that and charge it one time, because 20 stacked against 20 calls stacked is more than likely you get that charge to stick versus, how do you know it wasn't a butt dial? Right, so they're looking at different ways to prove it's not butt dials. They're looking at different ways to prove it's not like these other little things.
And what about like platforms like Snapchat?
Yep. So social media is a very hard one to prove, unless it's like a Facebook profile that's widely known, or a verified account, or an account that's undeniably theirs. But even then, on those social media platforms, they have to be able to prove that it was the individual behind that computer that sent that message. So, because what can end up happening is, let's say you call the cops and you say, hey, this guy sent me a message over Facebook Messenger. Cops are like, all right, that's violation of protection order, let's go hook him. And then you show up, the cop shows up to his house, and he's got a friend over there, and the friend's like, no, I sent that. He told me what happened, I thought it was bullshit, so I sent a message anyways.
It's so crazy.
Right. So, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Like, has to get proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Cops shouldn't go that far, they should go to probable cause.
Well, I think the story is document everything. Because if he's called you 30 times and sent you Facebook Messenger or Instagram DMs,
right,
or Snapchat, whatever, I mean, when you start putting it all together, that would take away the reasonable doubt, right?
Well, I don't know about reasonable doubt, but it adds more towards probable cause. It's called like the preponderance of evidence. So they can take that and they can put all that together, and then they can stack it. They can put a charge together on them, and they could be like, okay, this is more than likely this crime was committed. This individual did do it, and then it's on the DA to work that out, figure out how deep they're going to go with it, as far as the charge goes.
What would you say to somebody that's feeling like guilty for not, because I feel like that's a real thing, where you want to be diligent and you want to put all this stuff together, but you feel this unreasonable guilt that you're ruining somebody's life, even though you're not the one that did it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not logical, but it is what happens.
If it's a mother that I'm talking to, I would say, you have kids, you love your kids, you want to keep your kids safe, document it. Yeah. You might not care about yourself, you might care about ruining somebody else's life, but I know for a fact you value your kid's life more than them. And like these people go from not a big deal to a big deal very quick. It can go from something simple like getting shoved up against a wall to being locked in a basement.
Yeah, we've seen several stories, even this past week,
right,
of a girl being held hostage for 3 days.
Right.
and beaten brutally.
Right.
That guy's out on bail right now.
Right. So,
We've seen a guy that was married for 4 months and decapitated his wife
right.
with a kitchen knife.
Right.
I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to get across is I just know what that feels like, and I don't have a logical thing that I can sit here and say, this is why.
That's my logical thing. If not
But
for you, do it for your kids. Do it
if
for
you
your
don't have,
family.
even if you don't have children, like, you have to be able to separate yourself from the emotion and think logically, because even if you don't have children, he's going to do it again. If somebody's capable of doing that and they suffer 0 consequences, they will do it again.
Right.
And it's a promise.
Right. Like I said, I've seen.
So they'll do it to other women. And
Absolutely.
that's why we're doing this.
Right. I've personally seen a female tied up in a basement, abused and raped for multiple days before she was able to get out. That was not the first incident, I promise you. So, if anything, don't do it. Like, you don't do it for them because you worry about ruining their life, because probability says they're going to ruin yours. You would think twice about getting pissed off at a drunk driver that killed your child.
Yeah,
And documenting that.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself to take care of the people that you love.
Yeah. Oxygen mask on yourself first.
Right. Yeah. Put your mask on and then worry about everybody else.
Yeah.
Exactly. So next time we come back, we'll go over how we ended up meeting, and that's a fun story in itself. But also the things that you can do to better prepare yourself. And if anything, even if you see all of this stuff and you go, okay, well, this is all crap, it does bring confidence. Just knowing some of the stuff does bring confidence.
It honestly does. It honestly does.
Yep.
I felt a lot better after learning and going and getting a little bit of training.
Right.
A minimal amount.
Yeah. It should improve your confidence, and just being able to have that breathing space, I'm sure, is huge.